as I mentioned in the news or weekly update, I do want to talk about conjugal love. It's something that it's hard to kind of work into a sermon series in a lot of ways because there's not lots of biblical stories that talk about it and exemplify it. It's kind of Swedenborg goes off on his own and throws in some Bible quotes here and there to support it, but a lot of conjugal love it's different. You know, it's just not an illustrated story in the Scripture. And I think that's perhaps part of the reason why if you go through each chapter of conjugal love, at the end of it, there's a illustration. It's hey, this is what I saw in heaven about conjugal love. And in the first section, the first chapter, it's titled Marriages in Heaven. And a lot of the stuff in that chapter is fairly basic for the veteran new church person. He's basically asserting, hey guys, you live in the next life much like you do here. You know, you've got a mind and a body and you do things, and it's in a lot of ways not that different. And by the way, there are marriages as well. So he's kind of laying down a foundation that in some basic ways, life in the next life isn't that different. You're not floating around like some airy wisp. At the end of all of that, he has two accounts that he talks about. And I'm going to read you the second one because it has to do with adolescent boys who've made their way into the next life. And I thought, well, you know, if we have any kids that show up to this, they're going to be adolescent boys. So this would be the story to read because it speaks to that time of life. So it's just a couple pages long, but it gives you some insight into the idea between a chaste love of the sex and a lustful love of the sex. And for those of you who don't know what chaste means, it's about clean. It's about having a love of women that is clean as opposed to just kind of more an animalistic urge. So here's what he writes. I once saw 3 spirits newly arrived from the world who were wandering about, exploring and asking questions. They were in a state of astonishment that they were living as people just as before, and that they were seeing the same things as before. For they knew they had departed from the former natural world, and they believed that they would not live as people until the day after the last judgment, when they would be clothed with flesh and bones laid in their graves. So I guess I'll say this mostly for Zach's benefit, but there are plenty of religions that think that you die and you just lay there in the ground until the Lord comes again, and then you get raised up. So that's what these kids were thinking. To remove all doubt that they were still truly people, therefore they alternately inspected and touched themselves and others and handled the things they found, and in 1,000 ways kept convincing themselves that they were now people as they had been in the former world, except that they were seeing each other in a brighter light, and the things they found in a greater splendor, thus seeing them more perfectly. Then by chance 2 angelic spirits met them and stopped them, saying, "Where are you from?" They answered, "We have departed from the world and are again living in a new world. So we have traveled from one world to another, and at this we are now just marveling." Then the 3 newcomers began asking the 2 angelic spirits about heaven. And because 2 of the 3 newcomers were adolescents, and from their eyes darted what seemed to be a spark of lust for the opposite sex, the angelic spirits said, "You perhaps have seen some of the women here." And they replied, "We have. We have." So because the newcomers had asked about heaven, the angelic spirits told them the following. In heaven, all things are magnificent and splendid, and are such as the eye has never seen. There are also young men and women there, young women of such beauty that they may be called the very pictures of beauty, and young men of such morality that they may be called the very pictures of morality. And the beauty of the young women and the morality of the young men correspond to each other as reciprocal and mutually adaptable forms. The two newcomers then asked whether human forms in heaven are entirely similar to the human forms in the natural world. And the angelic spirits answered that they are completely alike, with nothing taken from either man or woman. In a word, the angelic spirits said, a man is still a man, and a woman is still a woman, in all the perfection of the form in which they were created. Step aside, if you like, and investigate your own case, whether anything is missing to keep you from being the man that you were before. Again, the newcomers said, well, we heard in the world from which we departed that in heaven they are not given in marriage because they are angels. Is love between the sexes possible then? The angelic spirits replied, the love you mean between the sexes is not possible there, but an angelic love for the opposite sex is, which is chaste and free of any temptation arising from lust. To this the newcomer said, if love for the opposite sex is without temptation, then what is love between the sexes? And when they began to think about that love, they groaned and said, oh, how dry the joy of heaven is. What young man can then wish for in heaven? Is not a love like that sterile and devoid of life? To this the angelic spirits laughingly replied, angelic love for the opposite sex, or the kind of love that exists in heaven, is still full of the deepest delights. It is a most pleasant swelling of everything in the mind, and consequently of everything in the breast. And within the breast is if the heart were sporting with the lungs. From this sport comes a breathing, tone, and speech which cause the companionships between the sexes, or between the young men and women, to be heavenly sweetness itself, which, at the same time, is pure. All newcomers on ascending to heaven are examined in respect to what their chastity is like, for they are introduced into companionships with young women, the beauties of heaven, and perceive what these newcomers are like in regard to their love for the opposite sex. They perceive it from their tone of voice, their speech, their facial expression, their eyes, their bearing, and the atmosphere emanating from them. If the love is unchaste, if it's unclean, the young women then run away and report to their friends that they have seen satyrs or lechers, like demons. And what is more, the newcomers undergo a change, and to the eyes of the angels they appear hairy with feet like those of calves or leopards. They are also soon cast down to keep them from polluting the atmosphere there with their lust. Listening to this, the two newcomers again said, there is no love between the sexes in heaven. What is chaste love between the sexes but love emptied of the essence of its life? Are the companionships of young men and women there not then just dry joys? We are not made of stone and wood, but of living perceptions and loves. When the two angelic spirits heard this, they indignantly retorted, you do not know what a chaste love between the sexes is, because you are not yet chaste. That love is a true delight of the mind and so of the heart, and not at the same time of the flesh below the heart. Angelic chastity, which is found equally in both sexes, prevents that love from passing beyond the confines of the heart. But within those confines and above them, the morality of the young men and the beauty of the young woman find delight in the delights of a chaste love for the opposite sex, delights which are deeper and richer for their pleasantness than can be described in words. But this is a love that angels have for the opposite sex, because they have only married love, and married love is not possible at the same time as an unchaste love for the opposite sex. True married love is a chaste love and has nothing to do with unchaste love. It is with one and only one of the opposite sex, with all others set aside, for it is a love of the spirit and consequently of the body, not a love of the body and consequently of the spirit. That is, it is not a love that infests the spirit. On hearing this, the two adolescent newcomers rejoiced and said, "Then there is still love between the sexes in heaven? Ho-ho! What else is married love?" But to this the angelic spirits replied, "Think more deeply, weigh the matter, and you will see that the love you mean between the sexes is a love outside of marriage, and that married love is altogether different, being as different from the love you mean as the wheat is from the chaff, or better, as different between human life is from animal life." If you were to ask women in heaven what love outside of marriage is, I assure you they would respond, "What is this? What are you saying? How can such a thing that so offends the ears come out of your mouth? How can a love not created in the first place to be engendered in a person?" If you then ask them what true married love is, I know they would answer that it is not a love for the opposite sex, but a love for one of the sex, which arises only when a young man sees a young woman provided by the Lord, and a young woman, the young man, both feeling an inclination to marry, kindled in their hearts, and perceiving the young man that she is for him, and the young woman that he is for her. For then the love presents itself, for love then presents itself to love and causes them to recognize each other, at once joining in their souls and afterwards their minds. From there it enters their hearts, and after the wedding goes on beyond. And so it becomes a full love, which daily grows in union, even to the point that they are no longer two, but virtually one person. I know, too, that these same women would swear that they are not acquainted with any other love between the sexes. For they say, "How can there be any love between the sexes unless it is honest and reciprocal, that it aspires to eternal union, which is that the two may become one?" To this the angelic spirits added, "In heaven they do not know at all what licentiousness is, not even that it exists or is possible. The angels grow cold with their whole body at unchaste love outside of marriage, and on the other hand they grow warm with their whole body as the result of chaste or married love. In the case of men there, all their sinews sink at the sight of licentious women, and grow taut at the sight of their wife." The three newcomers hearing this asked whether there is the same love-making between married partners in heaven as on earth. The two angelic spirits answered that it is entirely the same. And because they perceived that the newcomers were wanting to know whether they had the same end delights in heaven, they also said that these are entirely the same, but much more blissful, since the perception and sensation of angels is much more exquisite than the perception and sensation of people. Moreover, what is the life accompanying that love if it does not stem from an underlying condition of ability? If this ability fails, does that love not fail and cool? Is this power not a real measure and a real progression and foundation of that love? Is it not its beginning, support, and fulfillment? It's a universal law that the primary elements in a series exist, subsist, and persist on the basis of final elements. So also that with any love. Consequently, without the end delights, there would not be any delights in married love. The big takeaway here, I think, is there's a difference between clean love and what they call licentious love or lustful love. And a lot of things, where I see a lot of things happening in this world go wrong, it's about a confusion between lust and love. You know, we think we're attracted to something, and, well, we are. But just because we're attracted to something doesn't mean it's good. It doesn't, you know, that's not the litmus test as to whether something's right or wrong. It's very easy to be attracted to things that are bad for us, right? We all like foods that are bad for us, drinks that are bad for us. Well, we also have sexual inclination towards things that are bad for us as well. And what this is trying to make the case is be careful about what you allow yourself to be attracted to, because you can go down the wrong path with that. And as you focus in on a good path, well, it brings great rewards. That's kind of how the Lord's kingdom works. If you do the right thing, something good will come out of it, including restraint of your sexual desires. So that's section 1 of Conjugial Love. Amen.